I'm Ashley Forrest Hood, and I am the driver of the Castrol GTX Auto Club Ford Mustang Funny Car.
What inspired you to become a race car driver, and when did you start?
I grew up around racing. My father, John Forrest, has been racing for over 30 years. So as a very little kid, I grew up around the track, around race cars, traveled across the country with him, and it just became a part of my life, something that I loved to be a part of. As I got a little older and started thinking about what I wanted to be when I, as a career, I thought, why not do something that I love to do already? I love being at the races. I love watching the races. Why not take a career in drag racing? So at 16, I got a chance to go to Frank Hawley's drag racing school out here in Pomona, California, close to my home. And that was the first time I ever climbed into a race car. It was a Super Comp dragster. I got my license, I started racing, and 8 years later, I've moved up into the funny car class, and I now race against my father.
What do you do to prepare yourself before a big race?
My team and I have a very specific routine of how we get ready for every race. We don't change anything. No matter what state we're in, no matter how the day's going, no matter who we're racing, our routine has to be the same. Otherwise, if you change things, that's when you tend to make mistakes, forget things, do things differently. So when it's time for us to race, we almost always will warm up 2 hours before the race will start or before our first qualifying session. Then the team will, finish getting the car ready for the race. I will get all my gear in the car. I set it up exactly the same every run with my gloves in the same order, with my helmet, everything the same so that my routine's the same and I don't make a mistake and forget to put in my earplugs or forget to put in my mouth guard. And then it's time, to go up to race. My team will tow the car up into the staging lanes. We usually have a little downtime. We'll sit in our tow van and listen to the pairs ahead of us, hear how it's going on the track. My crew chiefs will be up on the starting line, checking the track, the temperatures, making any last-minute decisions on the tune-up. And then when it's time to go, I put my gear on. My guys get me in the car, seat belt me up, and I'm good to go for my next run.
What kind of engine do you use, and how long does it last?
I use a Brad Anderson 500 cubic inch engine, and if things are going good and we're not blowing up anything, these engines can usually last about 10 runs. Of course, between every single run, no matter if it's a good run or a troubled run, we still tear down the car, tear apart the motor, check everything, check the pistons and rods, put it all back together. We do that no matter how the run goes. But if everything's going well, we can usually make these motors last about 10 runs.
How fast does your car go, and what is your best quarter-mile time?
My best quarter-mile time in the funny car is a 329-mile-per-hour run, and my best elapsed time that I went down the quarter-mile is 4.72 seconds. Now, this past year, they made a rule change where they shortened our track. The track's still the same length, but they shortened how far we make our runs from 1,000 foot, or from a quarter mile, which was 1,320 feet, up to 1,000 foot. And that was a safety change they made to give us more time to get the cars slowed if there was trouble. There was multiple reasons, but basically it was a safety change that NHRA decided on. So now we only run to 1,000 feet. And my quickest time to 1,000 feet is 310 miles an hour in 4.04 seconds. So that's kind of the difference to explain that, our length of how far we run is different. But the speeds are still well over 300 miles an hour and very quick and very exciting.
How do you deploy the parachutes after the car finishes the race?
As I come to the finish line, I reach up and I push a lever that's mounted on our Mustang body, and I push the lever forward, and that's how our chutes deploy. Now, if there's ever a problem with a run, an exploder, where it blows the burst panel, we have recently added a new safety idea where the car automatically, if that burst panel is blown, automatically the chutes will deploy, the fuel lever will turn off, That's in the case of an emergency, because if there's an explosion, obviously you need all that stuff off. There's no reason to not have the chutes off, to not have the fuel off. So it's just an extra precaution. Drivers are trained anyway in any emergency, any problem, to do all those things, but this new safety edition helps to make it happen quick. So, but for the most part, we usually don't have explosions, and usually right at the 1,000-foot mark, I'm getting ready and I hit my parachutes and deploy them and slow the car down and turn it off at the end of the run.
Have you ever gotten into an accident during a race?
Over the years, I've had some fires, I've had some explosions, nothing too traumatic. Probably my worst crash was in 2007 at the Seattle race. I raced Kenny Bernstein in the second round and had to pedal the car. I think he did too. We both were kind of in a pedal fest, and I got back onto the throttle too soon. I wasn't pointed straight, and I ended up spinning around backwards. I hit the wall. My Mustang body blew off of the car. It was really a crazy-looking crash, trailing around behind me as I spun. It was scary for everyone watching. It wasn't quite as bad from the inside, surprisingly, but you could see me in the video footage hitting my fuel off, doing my routine, that I was aware, I knew what was happening and what I needed to do. Crashes sometimes are part of drag racing. These cars are very powerful and they're very fast, and that's part of the learning curve that you need to learn how to drive these cars, but you also need to learn what to do if you do have a problem. You need to know, no matter if there's smoke, if there's what's happening, you got to get your parachutes out, you got to hit your fuel off. You need to do the best to your ability to keep your car in your lane, and that's part of it. So I walked away from it. I was fine. I had no injuries. I had a little bit of a headache, but we were back at the next event racing again.
How did you feel when you won your first race? Do you remember who you beat?
The very first event I ever won was in my A-Field dragster. It was in 2004 at the Mac Tools U.S. Nationals, one of our biggest races of the year. I was in the final round against Shelly Howard. It was an all-female final. I won the race, and it was just an awesome day. It was such a tough race that it was this, our big race in Indy made it that much more exciting. That was my first win. My first win in the funny car came last year in 2008. It was in Atlanta, Georgia, and I raced my father, John, in the final round. And that was such a crazy day because we had rain out all throughout the day, so it was about 11 at night when we were finally racing our final. Everybody was wet. The fans, they stuck it out, and they were still there to the end of the night. But I got my win against my dad, and it was just a great day.
Why is your car called a funny car?
I guess the original drag race cars were dragsters, and that's kind of what people got accustomed to seeing on the drag strip. They're the long, skinny rail cars. The motor sits behind the driver. There's not a body over it. That's kind of was the normal car that people were used to seeing. Even though I think those are more funny looking, I think the funny cars kind of tend to resemble a normal street car a little more. But when people came out with a funny car, it just looked funny to everyone. There's the motor sits in front of the driver. It's shorter than the dragster. There's a body that comes down over it that lifts up and down. And I think that's basically how it came to be called a funny car, because it just looked different than the dragsters that people were used to seeing. But at over 300 miles an hour, there's not too much funny about it.
Do you enjoy playing any other sports during your free time?